The HistoryNetwork.org podcast, Season 17, Episode 9, Hobarts, Funnies, Hobart. Today's show is brought to you by Harry's. Please visit harrys.com and use the promo code HISTORY to save $5 off your first purchase. D-Day, the invasion of Europe, was to take place at low tide. This minimised the risk of landing craft hitting mines and other submerged obstacles, but this created problems for the troops being landed. It was going to be a long dash over a sandy beach which may have been mined. Supporting vehicles could quickly become bogged down in the soft sand. Then, once over the beach, the man-made defences had to be breached. To achieve this, the 79th Armoured Division was formed, commanded by the maverick Major General Percy Hobart. He oversaw the development of a number of unusually modified tanks to overcome problems the invaders would face. These would become known as Hobarts' Funnies. Hobart was born in India in 1885. His father was a civil servant in India, but the family returned so the children could be schooled in England. Joining the cadets at school, he performed well and was accepted into the Royal Military Academy at Woolwich in 1902. The shop, as it was known, trained officers of the artillery and engineering. A fine shot, a good sportsman, and an adept student, on graduation he was accepted into the 1st Bengal Sappers and Miners in 1906. In his memoirs, Hobart wrote, "They were very much a corps d'élite, as the C&C India had recently called them. Picked from a long waiting list, one had to resign if one got engaged to be married. Of the establishment of 18 officers, 9 became generals, 3 brigadiers, and 4 were killed." Soldiering in India was not all polo and gin. The Pax Britannica was maintained by aggressively subduing trouble spots, one of which was the northwest frontier, where tribal conflict bubbled away. Regular expeditions were launched, to which a young Hobart was dispatched. With the outbreak of war in 1914, an Indian expeditionary force was sent to Europe. Arriving with it in January 1915 and serving on the Western Front was Hobart. Though put to engineering works, this did not stop him and his men taking up rifle and acting as infantry, for which he received a military cross. When much of the Indian force was withdrawn from France, Hobart went with them, dispatched to Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. This was in reaction to Turkey declaring war and siding with Germany. He was now moved to a staff position and was not shy about letting his seniors know his views, even when it went against theirs. This characteristic did not serve him well in the long run, only working to turn many against him throughout his career. Mesopotamia provided glimpses of what was to come in the next war. Airplanes were used for reconnaissance, and rather than being a static trench war, this was one of movement, where the cavalry and armoured formations were used to strike deep into the enemy flanks. Hobart was nominated to attend the first Staff College course run after the war. It was a select group that attended. Bernard Freyberg VC would lead the New Zealand Expeditionary Force. Lord Gort VC would command the BEF in 1940. Henry Maitland Wilson would be Supreme Allied Commander in the Mediterranean, and Alan Brooke would become Chief of the Imperial Staff for much of the Second World War. One name that didn't attend was the future Field Marshal Montgomery, who coincidentally married Hobart's sister. In the post-war era, the use of the tank had become a hot topic in the military fraternity. Those, such as JFC Fuller, who commanded tanks during World War I, were advocating more mechanisation of the army. Hobart agreed with Fuller, and in 1923, as he took up an instructor's position at the Staff College in Quetta, transferred into the Tank Corps. Though lip service was given to mechanising the army, money was tight. In 1936, just £2 million was allocated, and most of that was spent on trucks for the infantry. In these lean years, Hobart continued his rise through the ranks. He became inspector for the Royal Tank Corps and noted in his official report that the Corps had completely lost its lead in the matter of numbers, up-to-date equipment, and now maintains superiority, if at all, only in maintenance, organisation, and tactical methods and personnel. These hard truths didn't win favour, nor did it help when his superiors believed the future of a mechanised force to be similar to that of the cavalry, screening the main force and providing reconnaissance. This was totally at odds with the blitzkrieg-type tactics he was championing and which the Germans were developing. The new SIG's Commander Imperial General Staff, Field Marshal Deverell, even mentioned the possibility of disbanding the Tank Corps. Against this, Hobart was lobbying the War Office on the best composition of a mobile force. When Deverell went, Hobart was given the post of Director Military Training. In doing so, he was skipped over as commander of the newly formed Mobile Division. Such was the conservatism of the military establishment that one of the appointees put forward by the War Department's last assignment had been in the job of training riding instructors. Instead, the job went to Alan Brooke. As Director Military Training, he was once more fighting the reactionary tide who resisted change. He was one of the last high-ranking advocates of the tank left in a senior post. Frank and lacking tactful diplomacy, he was removed from his post and offered a newly formed mobile division in Egypt. No doubt some believing a posting so far from Britain would remove him from the scene. Lieutenant General Sir Robert Gordon Finlayson was commander of the British troops in Egypt. He reportedly commented to Hobart on his arrival in September 1938, "I don't know what you've come here for. I don't want you anyway." It would be a troubled relationship. With the mishmash of what was available, including recently mechanised cavalry units and some World War I-era Rolls-Royce armoured cars, he set to work forming what would eventually become the famed 7th Armoured Desert Rats. Able to draw upon his own wartime experience of the desert from the last war, Hobart set about planning a training programme to instill into men that the desert was not the enemy. It allowed open movement where one could manoeuvre around the enemy's flanks. His force would be taught to survive and navigate deep into the desert. Storage dumps were established from which units could resupply. Much of the doctrine he laid down provided solid foundations for future desert operations. Indeed, these supply dumps enabled sweeping victories in 1940-41, which were part of Operation Compass. His intense training in the desert strained vehicles. New trucks on trial proved to be problematic in a terrain they were not prepared for. This was seen by HQ as a gross misuse of War Department transport. Gordon Finlayson and his staff seemed, as Hobart described in a letter to his wife, as complacent and apathetic. Gordon Finlayson returned to England in 1939, but not after describing Hobart in his annual confidential report as difficult to serve with or understand. He went on to complain of his reluctance to listen to other opinions, and going on to say he was unfit for a field command. The new commander in the region was Hobart's old Staff College colleague Henry Maitland Wilson. The historian Richard Mead described Wilson as sound but not spectacular. Certainly his record in the Second World War shows him to be a steady pair of hands in some important commands. Visiting Hobart in the desert soon after arriving in the region, though lacking in familiarity with armour, he was impressed with what he saw. This was not to last. With war on the horizon, the Mobile Division was recalled to the Nile Delta to refit, but not before a field exercise had taken place. It turned out to be a farce. Wilson failed to communicate to Hobart his intentions. Hobart didn't inform the exercise controllers of his intentions. With communication breaking down, Wilson ventured into the desert to sort matters out, only to get lost. When he eventually found his way to Hobart's HQ, in front of his own men, he gave Hobart a dressing down. After the debacle, Wilson wrote to Archibald Wavell, the C&C Middle East, "I have no confidence in the ability of Major General Hobart, CB, DSO, OBE, MC, to command the Armoured Division to my satisfaction." Coupled with Gordon Finlayson's parting shot, Hobart was ordered to hand over his division and return to England. In March of 1940 he was put on retirement pay and moved to Chipping Campden in Gloucestershire. Lady Hobart would later recall the 1940 dismissal from the army as the one time in their life together that the general had shown distress over any reverse. "He was a stricken man," she said. "To anyone lacking his intense fortitude, the wound would have been mortal. No warning whatever was given that this blow was to fall." Richard O'Connor, who trained with Hobart in the desert and went on to command during Operation Compass, said of Hobart's mobile division in Egypt, "It was the best trained division I have ever seen." Still keen to serve, he joined the newly formed Local Defence Volunteers as a private. He was quickly promoted to Lance Corporal. Busying himself with what Churchill renamed the Home Guard, the war continued without him. He told his wife, "I cannot do what is ideal, so I must do what I can." In autumn of 1940, the head of Britain's anti-aircraft command, General Alfred "Tim" Pyle, had a meeting with Churchill. Pyle had served with Hobart in the Tank Corps in the 1920s before going on to command the 1st Experimental Mechanised Force. He mentioned to Churchill that Hobart, an excellent trainer of armoured units, had been sacked. Churchill, ever keen to find men of drive, organised lunch with Hobart at Chequers, the official country residence of the British Prime Minister. The two struck a chord. From now on, Churchill was to champion Hobart. 6 days later, Churchill wrote a memo to the then Chief of the Imperial General Staff, then Sir John Dill. Prime Minister to Chief of Imperial General Staff. "I was very pleased last week when you told me you proposed to give an armoured division to General Hobart. I think very highly of this officer, and I am not at all impressed by the prejudices against him in certain quarters. Such prejudices attach frequently to persons of strong personality and original view. In this case, General Hobart's views have been only too tragically borne out. The neglect by the General Staff even to devise proper patterns of tanks before the war has robbed us of all the fruits of this invention. These fruits have been reaped by the enemy with terrible consequences. We should, therefore, remember that this was an officer who had the root of the matter in him, and also vision. I have carefully read your note to me and the summary of the case for and against General Hobart. We are now at war, fighting for our lives, and we cannot afford to confine army appointments to officers who have excited no hostile comment in their career. The catalogue of General Hobart's qualities and defects might almost exactly be attributed to any of the great commanders of British history. This is a time to try men of force and vision, and not be confined exclusively to those who are judged thoroughly safe by conventional standards." He was initially offered the post of Commander Royal Armoured Corps, but turned it down. In March 1941 he was offered the 11th Armoured Division. Now in his mid-50s, he threw himself into his new role with what was available. At this time during the war, the British tanks being produced were very poor. He emphasised that every man in the tank crew was responsible for its maintenance. For the forthcoming invasion of North Africa, Operation Torch, 11th Armoured Division was set to be deployed. Now aged 57, thrilled at the prospect of active service, the medical board intervened to declare him unfit. Even a memo from Churchill did no good. Prime Minister to Secretary of State for War: "I see nothing in these reports of the medical board report on General Hobart which would justify removing this officer from command of his division on its proceeding on active service. Alan Brooke came to his rescue. The two men knew each other from their staff college days, though in the past they had had their differences. In May 41, after a visit to Hobart's HQ, he had written in his diary, "Spent the day with Hobo and found him in very good form and running a really good show." In the autumn of 1941, a large exercise was organised to give senior commanders experience in how to handle big formations. In attendance was Alan Brooke, who by the end of the year would be Chief of the Imperial General Staff. He saw enough to be impressed with Hobart on a professional level, so when a new Armoured Division was created, the 79th Division, in August 1942, he offered it to Hobart. But less than a year later, the British Army was suffering acute manpower shortages, and it looked like the 79th Armoured Division would be split up to fill gaps in other units. But Brooke had an idea and called Hobart to a meeting. He noted in his diary, "In afternoon had a long meeting with Hobart to explain to him new job I wish him to take on connected with flotation tanks, searchlight tanks, anti-mine tanks, and self-propelled guns." After some deliberation, Hobart accepted, but only on the understanding it would be an operational division, and once operational, he would command it. The division would now be the 79th Experimental Armoured Division, handling specialised armour. By the end of the war, it would be the largest division in the army, with almost 7,000 vehicles. I mentioned at the start of this podcast that this episode is brought to you by Harrys.com. Now, you know, if you've been with us for any length of time, we do occasionally take on a discerning sponsor for an episode here and there, and this is one of those occasions, and you really would be helping to support us if you'd pop along to Harrys.com, that's HARRYS.com, and use discount code HISTORY to get yourself $5 off your first purchase. So what is Harrys.com? Well, as you know, one thing about great military men of the time is that they had great moustaches. Hobart, Alan Brooke, Bernard Montgomery, Maitland Wilson, Archibald Wavell, they all had them. And to maintain a good moustache, what do you need? You need a good razor. Unlike the aforementioned British officer class, I don't personally sport a moustache, but I have been working on a bit of a goatee lately, and to keep that nicely shaped and sharp, there's nothing like having a really great razor to help me out, and thanks to Harry's, I can have just that. We all know that you get a great shave when you use great blades. Harry's make their own blades. When they found the perfect blade, they bought the factory in Germany, and they certainly know a thing or two about blades as they've been making them since 1920. By making their own blades, they are able to supply them direct to your front door. They cut out the middleman, making them half the price of other branded blades. In fact, they even ship them for free. So if you will use the code HISTORY at harrys.com, we can get you $5 off. Now, for just $15, you can get the Truman starter set with razor, blades, and foaming shaving gel. And I have to tell you that I've got one of the Truman starter sets, and they really are great. The shave foam is about the closest thing I've ever used to real shave foam, but that comes in a handy tube, and it has a great cooling sensation while you shave. The razor itself feels solid and sturdy, and there's a total of 3 blade heads in the kit too, just for $15, or should I say for only $10 if you use the code HISTORY at harrys.com. That's $10 to your door. They also do other sets like the Winston set for just $25. Great names for any history buff. Of course, that's just $20 to you if you use the code HISTORY at harrys.com. From then on, you can have the blades delivered at intervals that suit you. So whether you spot the everyday clean shave for the officer's mess, or whether you need to let that stubble grow a little bit to blend in on your undercover ops, Harrys.com has just the plan for you. You will never be stuck without a fresh razor again. You can see that they'll make really great gifts, and you can even personalise the gift by using Harry's engraving service. Perfect. So don't forget to go to harrys.com to find out more, including on their range of other shaving products, and it really will help support us at the History Network if you go along there and use the code HISTORY on your first purchase to get your $5 off. Thank you so much. In the concluding podcast of this season, we'll take a closer look at the 79th Division and Hobart's Funnies. With the failed landing at Dieppe in August 1942, lessons would be learned. Of the 58 new Churchill tanks of the Canadian 14th Army Tank Regiment, only 29 were landed, 2 sank, 12 got stuck on the shingle beach. The 15 that made it over the sea wall were confronted by anti-tank obstacles and were forced to retreat back to the beach. None made it back to Britain, and all the crews were killed or captured. Hobart would learn from the lessons, and a whole series of specialised armour would be produced, allowing engineers to perform many of their tasks protected by armour during Overlord, the invasion of France in 1944 and beyond. If you want to hear more about the Dieppe raid, we looked at it in Season 2, Operation Jubilee, which is available from our store on the website. Do you want to write a script on a topic we've not covered? Why not drop us a line? Some of our most popular episodes have been written by listeners. You can, of course, drop us a line about anything, info@thehistorynetwork.org, so do get in touch if you've got ideas for podcast subjects, would like to write a script for us, or want to bring us up on an error or point of contention. Whatever it is, we love to hear from you. Thanks again for listening. You've been listening to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast, written by Angus Wallace, read by Nick Barker.